Hi everyone, today we're doing a lifting thread case. This is this patient's first time getting threads. So here we are just marking up. I always like to take my time when I'm first assessing the patient when they're sitting completely up straight. Once they sit back down and I have them laying back, obviously it changes and disrupts where that tissue is laying. So I always like to make sure I'm placing my threads where my markings are and according to when the patient is obviously standing up and having gravity affect our lift. So once I have my markings how I want them, I go ahead and sit the patient back. All of the anesthesia that we do for this treatment is local, so here I'm just using 1% lidocaine with epi just to help control that bleeding a little bit at my insertion point. But I just go ahead and do my first two vectors here. I am doing something a little bit different today. I'm not using the same pilot hole for each one of my threads. I wanted my jowl vector to be just slightly higher. I felt like when I was marking up, I just got a better lift. So we're going to be doing that today. There, I'm just going in with an 18 gauge needle to create my pilot hole. I went ahead and made my pilot hole for both my vectors just starting off, so I can just go ahead and smoothly place my threads. With this cannula here, I am going to be placing just a little bit more local anesthesia, so I'm going in with just plain 1% lidocaine. I don't like using epi when I'm placing in my tracks. I just feel like it's way too much epinephrine, and if my patient's already nervous when I'm putting, a couple mLs into their face, sometimes it can make them a little bit jittery. So just going in with some plain 1% lido. This just helps with the discomfort when we're placing that thread. Overall, this treatment is not, I know it looks kind of intense, but overall it really is quite comfortable. I always have patients come in who say, I watched videos before I came in today and they're terrified. But once I start treating, they always say that it's not as bad as they thought it was going to be. Really, it's just kind of almost like a crawly feeling. I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain. It's not necessarily painful, but kind of feeling that cannula going through the tissue. I just tell my patients it's almost a creepy, crawly kind of sensation. It's kind of hard to explain, but as long as you're in the right plane, it should not be extremely painful. So here I'm just going in with my first vector to my nasolabial fold and going ahead and pulling back. This patient got a beautiful lift. You can already see it. Hopefully we'll include her before and after at the end. It depends when she comes back in for her follow-up. I like to see my patients back about 3 weeks out just to make sure all the bruising and swelling is completely gone. This patient is also going to be getting some cheek filler and chin, so I definitely want her to be completely healed prior to coming back in. But now I'm just going ahead and cutting my threads, and I like to use an alcohol swab just to pop those into place and make sure everything is nice and clean prior to putting a band-aid on over top of my insertion points there. But this is in real time. This is not sped up. So as you can see, it's a very quick treatment. Honestly, getting the patient cleaned up and marked up is the longest part. But you can already see how much of a lift she's gotten by my curvature in my jawline line that I had there. And then I just make sure to go in and ensure that all those barbs are fully engaged. So if I see any puckering or anything like that, I make sure to smooth that out. But now we are going in and doing her jawline, so we're just going to repeat that same process. Again, I'm going in with lidocaine, with epi, just for my insertion point to help control bleeding. That small X there, I marked off her facial artery. I do like to double check that once I have the patient laid back as well, just because it can change things a little bit, but we're not going that deep anyways, but it's just like a nice visual for me as I'm treating. You can't cause an occlusion with threads, but of course I do not want to bruise my patient, and if you're to nick the facial artery, you are going to give them a pretty gnarly hematoma, so of course we want to avoid that at all costs. So I always just go ahead and mark that off. So I'm repeating the exact same process. I'm just following right along my vector. Sometimes I have to change the direction a little bit of this vector, like not according with my line, because once I lift, it obviously changed my line a little bit there, my initial marking. But here I am just going in and creating that opening, and then I'm going to go ahead and place a little bit of lidocaine. As I'm placing my lidocaine, I don't like to do any more than 0.5 per vector, just because if you have too much fluid in that vector, that thread just ends up floating in fluid and you don't get as good of a lift because those barbs aren't able to engage. So I don't like to completely, flood that vector, just enough to take the edge off. That's really all they need. So this is my last thread on this side. This is a Arte 1 18 gauge. So kind of a middle of the road thread. She has nice tissue, but she's very thin, so I didn't want to do a 17 for her, so I went ahead and just dropped it down one, and we're doing 18s. But I kind of just tent up as I'm going along, and I make sure that I like my depth, and I make sure that I have the same depth across my entire vector. You don't want any sort of puckering, because you will be able to see that once the thread is placed as well. Once I'm a little bit past that area of animation, I just go ahead and pull back. And same process here, I just give it a small tug in the reverse direction, just a reverse pull, and then I just snip the excess. I'm going to go ahead and just put one final band-aid on here for her. I have them leave the band-aids on until the end of the day. No makeup for 48 hours. I don't have them use their skincare that night either. Just keep everything very clean. The most common complication from threads is infection. So I just want to make sure she is staying as clean as possible. I tell the patient that they need to keep this area clean for at least 24 to 48 hours, and then I will see them back in 3 weeks. But this is her seeing her lift. She's very happy about it, as you can see. She's pointing out how it lifted up her cheek as well. She looks amazing. And like I said, if we do have that before and after ready, we will put one at the end.